The bell above the front door of Mercer's Supply had rung 11,000 times in 12 years. I knew because my father had installed a mechanical counter behind the frame when he opened the store, and I'd checked it the morning he died. And I'd kept checking it every Monday since because rituals are what remain when the person who started them doesn't. The counter read 11,247 the morning the outbreak began. It would ring 6 more times before I disabled it, removed the clapper, and sealed the door with the first of many things I never expected to bolt shut. If you've ever had to lock something for good, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And if you want to know what those last 6 rings meant, consider subscribing. My name is June Mercer. I was 34. The store was mine. Mercer's Supply and Hardware, Main Street, Coloulston, Oregon. Population 2,200 on a generous census day. We sold everything a small town needs and nothing at once. Lumber, fasteners, plumbing fittings, electrical wire, hand tools, garden supplies, kerosene, animal feed, and in the back corner, my father always called the apothecary, a modest selection of first aid supplies, batteries, and canned propane. The building was a converted grain warehouse from 1931. Cinder block walls, poured concrete floor, steel truss roof, loading dock in the rear. 14,000 square feet of organized inventory that I could navigate blindfolded and frequently did during power outages, which in Coloulston happened 4 or 5 times a winter. I was not a survivalist. I was a shopkeeper. The distinction matters because everything that followed grew not from ideology or preparation, but from the accidental fact that I happened to be standing inside a building full of tools when the world required them. Bell ring 11,248 was Patrice Odom at 7:15 a.m. She ran the diner across the street and came in every Tuesday for the same thing. A box of 60-watt bulbs and a flat of napkins I special ordered from a restaurant supplier in Eugene. She was 58, formidable, and the only person in Coloulston who had ever made my father laugh so hard he dropped a cash register on his foot. "Something's wrong on the highway," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "Traffic's backed up past the Grange, and I saw Denny Farwell's ambulance going south with the lights on, but no siren. You hear anything?" I hadn't. Cell service in Coloulston was one carrier with 2 bars on a clear day, and my morning had been spent in the stockroom reconciling a lumber delivery that was short 4 sheets of OSB. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Not unusual, but Patrice's expression made the absence feel specific. Bell ring 11,249 was Cal Tipton, 17, who worked for me after school and on weekends. He came through the door already talking, which was his default state. "Mrs. Odom, your diner's locked and there's a guy sitting on the sidewalk outside it who looks really sick, like hospital sick. He's just sitting there rocking." Patrice left immediately. I watched her cross the street through the front window. The man was sitting against the diner's brick facade, knees drawn up, head rolling in a slow arc. Even from across the street, I could see the wrongness in the movement. Not the restless shifting of someone in pain, but a mechanical rhythm, as if the body were running a single motor program on repeat. Patrice crouched beside him. She touched his shoulder. His head snapped toward her hand and his jaw opened wide. Not to speak, not to scream, but with the involuntary gaping reflex of something that had lost every function except the most primitive one. Patrice jerked backward and fell. The man didn't pursue. He returned to his rocking, jaw still working, eyes fixed on nothing. Patrice crossed back to the store at a pace I had never seen from her. She came through the door without triggering the bell. She caught it with her hand instinctively, as if noise had suddenly become dangerous. "That's not a sick man," she said. "Lock the door, June." Her voice was calm in the way that water is calm before it breaks over the edge. I had known Patrice Odom my entire life. She did not say things she did not mean. I locked the door. The deadbolt was commercial grade. My father had installed it himself, sunk into the original steel frame. Bell ring 11,250 would wait. It would be the last one I allowed, and it would bring someone I didn't expect, and it would cost more than I was ready to pay. Cal pressed his face to the window like a kid at an aquarium. I pulled him back by the collar. "Don't stand in the sight line. They respond to sound, not sight," he said. "I read that online. You read nothing online because there's no signal. Step back. He stepped back. I liked Cal. He was bright, disorganized, relentlessly verbal, and he had an unsettling capacity for calm in situations that should have frightened him. He'd been working for me since he was 15, sweeping floors and stocking shelves after his mother's third back surgery made it clear the family needed a second income more than Cal needed a full extracurricular schedule. He knew the store almost as well as I did. Where I knew it as architecture and inventory, he knew it as possibility. He was always seeing things the products could become rather than what they were. Patrice was behind the counter using the store's landline. The landline still worked, which meant the phone company's copper infrastructure was intact even if the cell towers weren't. She called the county sheriff's dispatch. Busy signal. She called the Coloulston Volunteer Fire Department. Ringing, no answer. She called her sister in Roseburg. The call connected. Lane, turn on your television and tell me what you see. I watched Patrice's face as she listened. The color didn't drain. Patrice was too composed for theatrical pallor, but her jaw set in a way that aged her 10 years in 10 seconds. How many cities? She asked. She hung up without saying goodbye. She looked at me and said, it's everywhere. Portland, Seattle, Sacramento. Lane says the governor declared a state of emergency an hour ago. National Guard is deploying, but the highways are gridlocked. They're calling it a parasitic infection. Airborne initial vector. Then it spreads through bites. Incubation under 2 hours. Cal said, what does everywhere actually mean? It means what we have, I said. That sentence changed me. I didn't know it at the time, but speaking it out loud. What do we have? Converted me from a shopkeeper into something else because I looked around the store and I stopped seeing inventory. I saw materials. I saw capability. 14,000 square feet of cinder block in concrete and steel containing approximately 9,000 SKUs of hardware, tools, building materials, and supplies. If the world outside was collapsing, then the world inside this building was one of the most resource-dense environments in the county. I didn't fortify out of fear. I fortified because I understood what I was standing in. Cal, close and bar the loading dock. There's a 4x4 steel beam in aisle 9, top rack. Use the forklift to drop it into the door track. He didn't hesitate. He jogged toward the back. Patrice, I need you to start an inventory. Not everything, just these categories. I grabbed a receipt roll and a marker. Medical supplies, batteries, flashlights, propane, water. We've got cases in aisle 2, and the break room has a water cooler with 3 full jugs, canned goods from the vending machine. Write down quantities. Patrice took the list. You think we're staying here? I think we're starting here. Whether we stay depends on what happens in the next few hours. Through the window, Main Street was changing. Not dramatically. Coloulston didn't do dramatic, but I could see Mrs. Tanaka from the bookshop locking her door. I could see Alan Driscoll's pickup truck accelerating past the post office faster than anyone drove on Main Street. And I could see at the far end of the block near the elementary school, a cluster of 4 or 5 figures moving with the same arrhythmic gait as the man outside Patrice's diner. They were walking south toward the residential streets, and they moved with a uniformity that made my stomach clench. Not coordinated, not organized, but synchronized by something internal, like a flock of birds turning on a signal no human ear could detect. The phone rang. Patrice answered. Her face changed again. It's Ray Dunn, she said, covering the mouthpiece. He's at the elementary school. He says there are children inside and the doors won't hold. Ray Dunn was the school janitor, 61 years old, built like a rain barrel, and in possession of a voice so deep it sounded like it came from a separate, larger person. Through the phone speaker, I could hear the specific resonance of his panic, not the high, scattered panic of someone losing control, but the low, grinding panic of someone who understood exactly how bad the situation was and was running out of ideas. There's 19 kids in the cafeteria, he said. Teachers got most of them onto the buses before the roads jammed, but bus 3 never showed. Mrs. Pratt's got them in the cafeteria with the doors locked. The main entrance is glass, June. I barricaded it with lunch tables, but they're pushing. 5 of them, maybe 6 now. I need something to reinforce these doors, or I need somewhere to bring these kids. I did the math. The elementary school was 3 blocks north, 3 blocks of open street, 19 children between the ages of 6 and 10, Ray, plus Mrs. Pratt. Can you get to the back exit? The one by the dumpsters? That's where 2 of them are. They're standing by the kitchen vent, just standing there. Drawn to heat, the kitchen exhaust fan vented warm air from the industrial dishwashers. The infected were clustering at the thermal output, the same way insects cluster at a light source. Not hunting, orienting, which meant the back exit was blocked not by aggression, but by stimulus. And stimulus could be redirected. Ray, listen to me. Is the kitchen equipment still running? The dishwasher's on its rinse cycle. Shut it off. All of it. Kill every appliance in the kitchen. Then open the front loading dock. The delivery bay on the east side. It vents to the parking lot, away from Main Street. Give it 5 minutes. If the ones at the back door drift toward a different heat source or disperse, get the kids out through the kitchen exit and come south on Birch Street. Stay off Main. And if they don't move, then I'll come to you. Patrice grabbed my arm when I hung up. Her grip was extraordinary. Decades of carrying diner trays had given her a hand strength that communicated without ambiguity. You're not going out there. 19 children. And if you die on the street, what happens to the 2 people in this building and the 21 who are counting on you to open the door when they arrive? She was right, and I hated that she was right, and the tension between those 2 facts. The children 3 blocks away and the building I was standing in was the first of many moments where I discovered that survival is not a single choice, but a continuous fracture between what you can do and what you should do. Cal returned from the loading dock. Sealed. That beam's not moving without a cutting torch. He read the room immediately. What happened? I told him. He didn't hesitate. The same quality that made him good in the stockroom made him fast in a crisis. The riding mower, he said. In the outdoor display area, it's fueled. If you drive it north on the sidewalk with the engine running, it's a mobile heat and noise source. You pull the infected away from the school, loop back around on Elm, and Ray brings the kids south while they're following you. It was reckless. It was also mechanically sound. A riding mower produced engine heat, exhaust, vibration, and noise. A concentrated stimulus package that would register more intensely than a dormant kitchen vent. If the infected followed gradients the way everything I'd observed suggested, the mower would pull them like a magnet pulls filings. I'll do it, Cal said. You're 17, and I can drive a mower faster than either of you. I've been cutting the Petersons 5 acres since I was 14. Patrice said, absolutely not. I looked at Cal. He was already moving toward the side door that led to the fenced outdoor display area. I looked at Patrice. She was already dialing Ray back to coordinate timing. The plan had 3 minutes of preparation and 40 seconds of margin for error. We used all of it. Cal went out the side gate at 8:40 a.m. on a green John Deere X350 with the throttle wide open and the mowing deck engaged, blades spinning against empty air, producing a high-frequency mechanical scream that shattered the morning quiet of Main Street like a brick through a window. I watched from the roof. The store had a flat roof accessible through a ceiling hatch in the stockroom, and I had climbed it with binoculars in the portable phone, staying low behind the parapet. From there, I could see 3 blocks in every direction. Cal turned north on the sidewalk, the mower bouncing over curb cuts and sidewalk cracks. The noise was extraordinary, amplified by the storefronts on either side of Main Street into a canyon of mechanical sound. Within 30 seconds, I saw the first response. The man outside Patrice's diner, the one who'd been rocking, stopped mid-cycle and turned his head toward the sound. Not his body, just his head. Then with the incremental hydraulic motion I was already learning to recognize, his body followed, and he stood, and he began walking toward Cal. From the north, the cluster near the school was reacting. 3 of the 5 figures at the main entrance pulled away from the glass doors and oriented south toward the mowing sound. They moved faster than I expected. Not running, but their stride lengthened and their pace increased, as if the intensity of the stimulus had adjusted some internal throttle. Ray, I said into the phone, 3 are pulling away from the front. Cal's drawing them south. You've got maybe a 90-second window before the sound diminishes and they might reorient. Get the kids out the back now. Kitchen exit's clear. They moved from the vent about 2 minutes ago. Then go. Birch Street, south. Don't stop. I watched Cal reach the end of the second block and swing the mower left onto Cedar Street, heading west. The three drifters from the school followed the sound around the corner, disappearing from my sightline. The two that had been near the school's kitchen vent had already wandered east, toward the school parking lot, where sun-heated car hoods offered a competing stimulus. The main entrance was unobstructed. Then I saw Ray. He came out the back door in a low crouch that looked painful for a man his size, holding the door while a line of children filed out behind him, each one gripping the backpack strap of the child in front. Mrs. Pratt, Ellen Pratt, who had taught second grade in Coloulston for 22 years, was at the rear of the line, moving with the rigid composure of someone who was keeping herself together through sheer professional obligation. The children were silent, not calm. I could see the terror in how tightly they gripped those straps. But silent, the way children become when an adult they trust has told them that silence is the most important thing they've ever done. They moved south on Birch. Ray led them behind the post office, through the alley between the hardware co-op and the Baptist church, and emerged on Main Street 1 block north of my store. I was already downstairs. Patrice had the side gate open. Ray brought them in through the outdoor display area, past the lawnmowers and wheelbarrows and stacked bags of potting soil, and into the store through the side door. 19 children sat on the concrete floor of aisle 4, fasteners and hand tools, and didn't make a sound. Mrs. Pratt knelt among them, counting heads, touching shoulders, confirming presence. Ray leaned against the end cap and put his hands on his knees and breathed in the deep, shuddering way of a man who had just outrun something he couldn't name. "Where's the boy on the mower?" Ray asked. I was already back on the roof. I scanned west on Cedar, south on Elm. The mowing sound had diminished. Al had cut the engine. I swept the binoculars across every visible street and didn't see him. 40 seconds. Then he appeared on foot at the south end of Main Street, jogging, carrying nothing, the mower abandoned somewhere I couldn't see. He reached the side gate and Patrice pulled him through, and he sat down on a bag of mulch and said, "Ran out of gas at the Chevron," which is ironic. 24 people, 1 building, and the morning wasn't over. The first hour after the children arrived was the most operationally intense period of my life. Not because of external threat. The street had gone quiet after Cal's mower run. The drifters dispersed along whatever gradients they'd found. But because 24 people inside a hardware store required immediate triage of needs that my inventory was not organized to meet. Water first, I had 36 cases of bottled water in aisle 2. We sold it during summer to construction crews, plus the 3 water cooler jugs in the break room. That was roughly 500 liters, enough for 24 people for 10 days at survival ration. But the children were dehydrated from fear and needed to drink now. Mrs. Pratt distributed bottles with the calm efficiency of someone handing out classroom supplies, and I watched 19 children drink in silence. And the sound of that, the quiet gulping, the gasping between swallows, was more disturbing than anything I'd seen on the street because it measured the fear in fluid ounces. Food was thinner. The store's vending machine held candy bars, chips, and packaged crackers. The break room had my lunch, a turkey sandwich and an apple, and a cabinet of communal supplies, coffee, powdered creamer, sugar packets, a sleeve of saltines. Patrice had brought nothing from the diner, but the diner itself was 80 feet away, across a street I couldn't currently assess. "The diner's walk-in cooler has 3 days of perishable stock," Patrice said, reading my thinking. "Eggs, ground beef, produce. Freezer's got more. But without power, the perishables are on a clock." "Power's still on," Cal said, pointing at the store's fluorescent lights. He was right. The grid was still live. Coloulston's power came from a regional co-op fed by hydroelectric dams on the Umpqua River, and those systems ran on inertia. They'd keep generating until something mechanical failed or someone shut them down. But grid dependency was a countdown, not a strategy. When the power goes, we lose the cooler, the lights, and the water cooler's chilling pump, I said. "We keep the lights off now. They're visible from the street and they generate heat. Flashlights only." Cal, pull every flashlight and headlamp from aisle 6 and distribute them. Batteries too. Full stock. Ray was standing by the window watching the street through a gap between a pegboard display and the frame. There's more of them now, he said quietly. Coming from the west, maybe 8 or 9, walking down Cedar. Toward what? Toward the Chevron, I think. The gas station's got a refrigeration compressor on the outside wall. Runs hot. You can hear it humming from a block away. Every active system in town was a beacon. Every compressor, every exhaust fan, every transformer humming on a pole. The drifters were mapping Coloulston's infrastructure by following its thermal and acoustic output, congregating at the loudest, warmest points the way water congregates in low ground. The town wasn't being attacked. It was being read. Its energy signatures parsed by organisms that had no cognition but perfect sensitivity to the physical world. I pulled the main breaker on the store. The fluorescence died. The refrigerator case in the back went silent. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the children breathing in aisle 4. June. Patrice's voice in the dark was steady. If you just killed our power, you'd better have a plan for what replaces it. Aisle 11. Generators, solar panels, battery banks. We have 4 Honda EU 2200i generators in stock, 12 Marine deep cycle batteries, and a pallet of solar panels I ordered for a customer who never picked them up. We go off-grid, self-contained, silent running. The generators are inverter models. They're the quietest on the market, but we only run them inside the building with exhaust vented through filtered ducting to disperse the thermal signature. Patrice said, "You've been thinking about this." "I've been selling this equipment for 12 years. I know what it does." That was the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I had spent 12 years inside this building, understanding every product as a function, and now those functions had a purpose that their manufacturers never intended, and the store was transforming around me from a retail space into something that had no name yet. By noon, 3 more people had reached us through methods I hadn't anticipated. The first was Denny Farwell, the paramedic whose ambulance Patrice had seen that morning, who arrived at the loading dock on foot, uniform bloodied at the sleeves, carrying a trauma bag and a portable oxygen concentrator. He didn't knock. He kicked the steel door 3 times in a pattern that sounded deliberate, and when Cal asked through the door how we could verify him, Denny said, "I set Cal Tipton's broken arm when he was 11 and he cried so hard he got hiccups, which I have never told anyone, so open the door." Cal opened the door. Denny's report was clinical and devastating. The clinic on 4th Street was overrun. Dr. Sharma had been bitten treating a patient who'd come in presenting with what looked like a seizure. The 2 nurses had barricaded themselves in the pharmacy, but Denny didn't know if they were still there. The ambulance was disabled. He'd driven it into a ditch avoiding a cluster of drifters on the highway, and the front axle had snapped. He'd walked 2 miles back to town through the fields east of the road, staying below the fence lines, and he'd seen what he estimated were 40 to 50 drifters moving in loose clusters along the highway corridor, all heading generally south, following the traffic that had stalled there. "The highway's a river," he said. "Cars are stopped bumper to bumper for a mile. Engines off, but the asphalt's retaining heat. They're walking between the cars like it's a channel." The second arrival was someone I knew only by sight. A woman named Marguerite Solis, who ran a small goat farm on the eastern edge of town. She came to the side gate carrying a rifle she clearly knew how to hold, and leading a 12-year-old boy by the hand. Her grandson, Tomas. She had seen Cal's mower run from her property and followed the sound to its origin, arriving after the street had cleared. "I'm not asking to stay," she said. "I'm asking to contribute. I have veterinary antibiotics, 17 goats, and 200 pounds of feed at my place. What do you need?" The third arrival was the one that changed the math. Bell ring 11,250, the last the bell would ever make, because I hadn't yet removed the clapper. Announced the arrival of Coloulston's mayor, Bram Hadley. Bram was 47, an insurance broker by trade, elected to a largely ceremonial position 2 years earlier because nobody else wanted the paperwork. He was not a leader in any operational sense, but he carried information. I got through to the county emergency coordinator in Roseburg before the landlines went down 20 minutes ago, he said. He was sweating through his Oxford shirt, his reading glasses pushed up into his hair. They're not coming. The National Guard is deployed to Portland and Eugene. Everything south of Roseburg is being classified as, his word, deferred. He said to shelter in place and wait for federal coordination. He couldn't give a timeline. Deferred, Ray repeated. We're too small, Bram said. 2,000 people. They're prioritizing population centers. The math doesn't justify sending resources here. Those are almost his exact words. The room absorbed this differently depending on who was listening. Mrs. Pratt closed her eyes. Ray's hands tightened into fists. Patrice showed no visible reaction, which was its own kind of response. Cal was already opening his mouth to say something, and I put my hand on his shoulder because what he was about to say, something defiant, something young and furious, was exactly right emotionally and exactly wrong strategically. Then we're the resource, I said. I looked at what I had, a cinder block building full of tools and materials, a paramedic, a rancher with livestock and antibiotics, a janitor who knew every building in town, a teacher who could manage 19 children in silence, a teenager who could drive anything with an engine, a mayor who knew the town's infrastructure, water, power, roads, better than anyone else alive. 27 people, one supply store, in a town that the world had decided wasn't worth saving. I took the bell down that afternoon. We couldn't afford to announce arrivals anymore. From that point forward, you got in by knowing something only a Coloulston resident would know, and you earned your place by what you carried. Not in your hands, but in your head. I have never in my life experienced anything as clarifying as inventorying a hardware store with the knowledge that no resupply truck would ever come. Every object in the building became two things at once, what it was and what it could become. This was a box of roofing nails. It was also caltrops, puncture barriers, improvised fasteners for barricade construction. A roll of Romex electrical wire was house wiring. It was also binding, trip line, antenna cable. A 5-gallon bucket of joint compound was drywall mud. It was also thermal insulation, acoustic dampening paste, sealant for draft-prone gaps that leaked heat signatures to the outside. Cal understood this intuitively. He walked the aisles with a clipboard and a system I hadn't taught him. He inventoried not by product category but by physical property. He made columns, rigid, flexible, adhesive, abrasive, reflective, insulating, combustible. When he was done, we didn't have a store inventory. We had a materials library organized by capability rather than retail logic. Denny set up a medical station in the break room. His trauma bag contained enough supplies for acute care. Suture kits, hemostatic gauze, tourniquets, a limited supply of antibiotics and analgesics. But not for sustained community health. Marguerite's veterinary antibiotics expanded the pharmacopoeia significantly, and as amoxicillin, whether the label says it's for a goat or a human, and Denny confirmed the dosages were translatable with adjustment for body weight. Ray and Bram mapped the town from memory. Ray knew every building's mechanical systems. He'd repaired furnaces, replaced water heaters, and unclogged drains in half the structures in Coloulston over 3 decades of janitorial work that extended well beyond the school. Bram knew the municipal infrastructure. The water treatment plant on Miller Road, the electrical substation behind the fire department, the propane distribution point at the co-op. Together they produced a functional schematic of Coloulston's circulatory system, where the power came from, where the water flowed, what would fail first and what would last longest. Water treatment runs on grid power with a diesel backup generator, Bram said. The backup has maybe 72 hours of fuel. After that, the treatment plant goes offline and the town's water supply becomes whatever's sitting in the tower and the distribution pipes, finite and diminishing. How much is in the tower? 50,000 gallons. Sounds like a lot until you divide it by 2,000. We're not dividing by 2,000, I said. We're dividing by how many people we can account for. That was the first time I said something that sounded like triage, and it tasted different from every other decision I'd made. Inventory management is impersonal. You count what you have and allocate it rationally. Population management is not. Every number represents someone I might know, someone I'd sold lumber to, someone whose child was sitting in my aisle 4. But the math didn't accommodate sentiment, and I was discovering that leadership in crisis was the discipline of following math into places where sentiment begged you to stop. By late afternoon, we had a functional picture of our position. The store contained enough materials to fortify itself and sustain 27 people for approximately 3 weeks at minimum consumption. The diner across the street contained food for perhaps 10 days if we could retrieve it. The water tower would supply the town's surviving population, however many that was, for somewhere between 1 and 3 weeks depending on demand. The power grid was still live but unreliable. The roads out of Coloulston were impassable in both directions. Highway blocked to the south, a bridge closure on the northern route that predated the outbreak by 3 days due to structural damage from spring flooding. We were contained, not besieged. There was no enemy at the gate, no intentional encirclement. The town had simply become an island through the convergence of geography, infrastructure failure, and a threat that followed the heat and noise of the highway corridor surrounding us. I stood in the center of the store that evening, lights off, the building silent except for the breathing of 19 children sleeping on moving blankets in aisle 4, and I understood for the first time that the store was not becoming a fortress. It was becoming a heart. The pump that would either circulate life through this town or stop. On day 3, I made the decision that still defines me more than any other. Patrice and I were planning the diner retrieval. The diner's walk-in cooler contained perishable food that was already deteriorating without power. The grid had dropped overnight, exactly as predicted, and Coloulston went dark in the early morning hours with a silence so total it woke every adult in the building. The perishables would be worthless within 48 hours. The freezer stock had longer, but not much. The problem was the street. Ray's observations from the window showed a consistent pattern. Drifters moved through the main street in irregular pulses, following thermal gradients from building to building, as HVAC systems failed and released stored heat. The diner's kitchen equipment, deep fryers, griddles, ovens, had been running when Patrice left, and all of it was now cooling, creating a diminishing but still significant heat signature that was drawing 2 to 4 drifters to the building's perimeter at any given time. "We wait for full cool down," Cal said. "Another 12 hours, the kitchen equipment reaches ambient temperature, the drifters lose interest. We walk across. In 12 hours, the eggs and dairy are gone," Patrice said. "And the ground beef, that's protein for 27 people for a week." I was weighing this when Bram brought me a different problem. He'd been monitoring from the roof and had counted what he estimated were 60 to 70 drifters visible within a 6-block radius of the store. They weren't concentrated. They were dispersed across the town in loose clusters, gravitating towards whatever residual thermal or acoustic signature remained from the grid-powered world that had just gone silent. But as those signatures faded, the drifters were beginning to move more randomly, which was in some ways worse than predictable clustering. A drifter following a gradient was legible. A drifter wandering without stimulus was chaos. "They'll start finding us through chance rather than attraction," Bram said. "We need to decide whether we're going to stay invisible or start actively managing them." "Manage them how?" "Draw them somewhere. Create a persistent stimulus source away from the store, away from wherever people are, and let them accumulate there. A kill zone, a dump site, whatever you want to call it." Marguerite, who had been listening from the medical station doorway, said, "You're talking about baiting them." "I'm talking about shepherding," Bram said. "Moving a herd from where you don't want it to where you do." The idea was sound in principle. If drifters followed stimulus, a sustained heat and noise source placed at the edge of town would draw them away from the inhabited center. The Chevron station was already partially serving this function. Its propane storage tanks retained heat, and the canopy lights had battery backup that was still flickering. But it was too close to Main Street. We needed something further out. Ray said, "The Sawmill." The Coloulston Sawmill sat at the northern edge of town, a quarter mile past the school, on a gravel lot beside the river. It had been closed for 8 years, but the structure was intact. A massive steel frame barn with a concrete pad and a diesel boiler that Ray had helped decommission. If the boiler could be restarted, it would produce significant heat and the characteristic industrial hum that seemed to attract drifters from considerable distance. The sawmill would become a thermal lighthouse, pulling the drifters north, away from the town center, away from us. That's a quarter-mile walk through active territory to reach a boiler that may not start, Patrice said. I can start it, Ray said. I shut it down. I know the sequence. And who walks a quarter mile to escort you? I'll go alone. I know every back path between here and there. I've been walking them for 30 years. The room was quiet. Ray Dunn, 61, bad knee, reading glasses on a lanyard around his neck. Volunteering to walk alone through a town filled with things that would kill him if they detected his presence. Not alone, I said. Marguerite, can you shoot accurately at 50 yards? I can shoot accurately at 100. Then you're going with him. Cal, I need you to build them something that will save their lives. I'll build it in 90 minutes from materials we had on the shelf. He called it a ghost suit, and I didn't have a better name. The concept was thermal concealment, a wearable barrier that trapped body heat inside rather than radiating it outward. He started with emergency mylar blankets from the camping section, cutting them into panels, and layering them inside oversized work coveralls from aisle 12. The mylar reflected infrared radiation inward, reducing the wearer's external thermal signature to near ambient levels. Over the canvas, he applied a spray adhesive and pressed on a layer of loose dirt and dried grass from the outdoor display area, breaking up the visual profile. The result looked absurd, like scarecrows assembled by a committee. But when Denny tested it by holding a hand against the outer surface while Ray wore it inside the warm stockroom, the coverall's exterior was noticeably cooler than exposed skin. It's not perfect, Cal said. You'll still produce breath vapor, footstep vibration, and scent. But if they're primarily tracking thermal gradients, this should reduce your signature to something like background noise. Ray put his on without comment. Marguerite examined hers with the practical skepticism of someone who assessed tools by function, not appearance, and then zipped it to her chin. They left at 2 a.m. through the loading dock. The rationale was thermal. Ambient air temperature was lowest in the pre-dawn hours, which meant the differential between their suited body heat and the surrounding environment was minimized. Denny had calculated this on the back of a receipt using data from a weather station thermometer. Also, Cal had found on the shelf. 41 degrees outside, suit exterior estimated at 46 degrees. A 5-degree differential versus the 20-plus degrees an unshielded human body would produce. I watched from the roof with binoculars. No moon. I tracked them by sound. Or rather, by the absence of sound, the negative space they cut through the ambient noise of a dead town settling in the cold. They moved north on Birch, the same route they'd used to bring the children in, staying behind buildings, crossing streets at the narrowest points. At the school, they paused. Through the binoculars, I could make out Ray kneeling, his hand on the pavement, feeling for vibration the way he'd probably checked 1,000 pipes for water. Hammer. He signaled Marguerite forward. They crossed the open ground north of the school in a low, steady walk that took 4 minutes. I lost sight of them behind the tree line at the edge of the mill property. 14 minutes of silence. I stood on that roof and counted my own heartbeats because counting something was the only way to prevent the counting from happening inside my head in worse denominations. The number of things that could go wrong, the number of yards between them and safety, the number of children sleeping below me who would wake up to a smaller world if Ray and Marguerite didn't come back. Then I heard it, a low subsonic rumble that I felt in my sternum before my ears registered it. The sawmill boiler firing. It built in intensity over 30 seconds. A deep industrial throb that vibrated the air itself. The sound of heavy machinery waking from years of dormancy. Within minutes, it would be producing heat that radiated through the mill's uninsulated steel walls like a bonfire in a tin can. Through the binoculars, I scanned Main Street. Movement. A drifter near the post office turned north. Another at the intersection of Main and Cedar reoriented, its body pivoting in a jerky quarter turn, then began walking. A third emerged from between 2 parked cars and joined the same trajectory. They were responding. Drawn toward the new dominant stimulus, like iron filings, reorienting to a stronger magnet. The sawmill was pulling them. Ray and Marguerite returned at 3:47 a.m. Ray was limping. He'd twisted his bad knee on the mill's gravel lot. And Marguerite's face was set in the expression of someone who had seen things in the dark she would describe only once, and only to someone who needed to know. Boiler's set to run until the diesel runs out, Ray said. I'd guess 4 to 5 days. 4 to 5 days of reprieve. We would need every hour. On day 5, the store stopped being a refuge and started being a distribution center. The shift wasn't planned. It emerged from a series of arrivals that I couldn't have predicted and couldn't have prevented. Word had spread. Not through technology, not through broadcasts, but through the oldest network in any small town. People talking to people who talk to other people through fences, across yards, from window to window. Mercer's Supply had power. Mercer's Supply had water. Mercer's Supply had a woman inside who was organizing. They came in ones and twos, always through the loading dock, always using the protocol Cal had established. Knock in a pattern, answer a question only a Coloulston resident would know. Who coached the middle school basketball team? What color was the awning on the old pharmacy before it closed? What street did the Christmas parade start on? The questions were Cal's idea and they were imperfect, but they filtered out randomness, and they forced each arrival to demonstrate connection to the place, which was itself a form of trust. By day 5, we had 41 people. By day 7, 53. The store could not hold 53 people. It was never designed to hold 53 people. The aisles became corridors, the stockroom became a dormitory, the break room became a surgical suite where Denny performed a procedure I couldn't watch. Removing 3 fingers from a man named Pete Ogilvy, who had been bitten while crossing his own backyard, and had the presence of mind to tourniquet the hand with his belt before the infection could spread past the wrist. The moral architecture of the building changed with every new person. When we were 27, I could know everyone. I could assign tasks based on individual capability. I could maintain a mental model of who was where, who needed what, who was breaking down, and who was holding steady. At 53, that model collapsed. People became categories: medical, labor, childcare, vulnerable. I was managing a system, not a group, and the system demanded things that the group didn't always agree with. The first real conflict came over the diner food. Patrice and I had executed the retrieval on day 3, a silent 18-minute operation during the deepest part of the Sawmill's draw, carrying everything from the walk-in cooler across the street in insulated bags. We'd recovered enough protein and produce to feed the original 27 for 10 days. But we now had 53 mouths, and the food would last 5, and 3 of those days were already gone. Marguerite proposed butchering 2 of her goats. She had moved the entire herd into the fenced lot behind the Baptist church on day 4. A relocation that required Ray and 2 volunteers in ghost suits to walk 17 animals 6 blocks through a town whose streets were now largely clear. The sawmill was doing its work. The drifter density in the center had dropped by what Bram estimated was 80%. 2 goats gives us meat for 3 days, Marguerite said, but I'm not butchering breeding stock unless we have a plan for what replaces them. The greenhouses, Cal said. Everyone looked at him. He was sitting on the checkout counter, legs swinging, which was where he did his best thinking. Aisle 8, we have PVC pipe, polyethylene sheeting, connectors, irrigation tubing, and grow lights. Aisle 2 has potting soil and seed packets, tomatoes, beans, squash, lettuce. We can build growing frames on the store roof. The roof gets full southern exposure. The poly sheeting creates a greenhouse effect. If we start now, we've got germination in 10 days and first harvest in 6 to 8 weeks. We don't have 6 weeks of food, Patrice said. We have 6 weeks of food if we ration to 1,200 calories per adult and supplement with goat milk from the remaining herd, Denny said. He'd been running the numbers on the back of an inventory sheet. It's not comfortable. Nobody will feel full. But the caloric deficit is survivable for that duration. And once the rooftop greenhouse starts producing, we shift to supplemented rations. Marguerite looked at her hands. 2 goats, named animals she had raised from kids. She nodded once, said nothing, and walked out to the church lot to choose which ones would die so the rest of us could think in weeks instead of days. The greenhouse changed the psychology of the building more than any barricade or protocol. I hadn't anticipated this. I had been thinking in material terms. Calories, water, shelter, security. And I had missed the dimension that Patrice identified on the evening of day 9, standing on the roof beside the first completed growing frame, watching Cal teach 2 of the older children how to fill seed trays with dampened potting mix. You gave them a future tense, she said. I didn't understand at first, she explained. Since the outbreak, every conversation in the store had been present tense or past tense. What do we have? What did we lose? What's happening now? The greenhouse introduced a verb form that hadn't existed in the building. What will grow, what we will eat, what this will become. The children who were filling seed trays weren't performing survival labor. They were planning something they expected to see mature. That expectation, that implicit belief in a future where the seeds would sprout and the food would be eaten, was the most subversive act of optimism anyone in the building had committed. Bram brought me a different kind of future that same evening. He'd been making cautious contact with other pockets of survivors in town, using a method so low-tech it embarrassed us all for not thinking of it sooner. He'd written messages on paper, sealed them in Ziploc bags, and had volunteers in ghost suits leave them on porches and doorsteps during low-activity windows. The messages were simple: who we were, where we were, what we had, what we needed, and instructions for reaching us safely. 12 responses came back within 48 hours, left at a designated drop point behind the post office. 11 were from individuals or families sheltering in their homes, running low on water, food, or medical supplies, requesting help. The 12th was from someone I hadn't expected. Her name was Orla Vance. She was a hydrologist with the State Water Authority, stranded in Coloulston while conducting a routine inspection of the municipal water system on the day the outbreak hit. She had been sheltering in the water treatment plant on Miller Road, alone with access to the facility's diesel generator and, critically, its treatment equipment. Her note was precise and professional. Municipal water tower at 68% capacity, treatment plant operational on backup generator, estimated fuel remaining, 96 hours. Without treatment, tower water remains potable for approximately 14 days before bacterial contamination exceeds safe levels. I can extend treatment plant operation if supplied with additional diesel fuel. I can also gravity feed treated water to the distribution system manually. I need fuel, and I need to not be alone out here. I read the note to the group. The room went quiet in a way that had weight. The water treatment plant was the single most critical piece of infrastructure in Coloulston, and it was being operated by one person on a dwindling fuel supply a mile from our position. If Orla's generator died, the town's water supply had a 2-week expiration date. After that, 53 people, and however many others were sheltering in homes, would be drinking from a source that was slowly becoming toxic. We need to get her fuel, I said. We need to get her here, Patrice said. No, Bram said, and the sharpness in his voice surprised everyone. We need to keep her there. She's the only person who can operate that plant. If we pull her out, we lose the water system entirely. We don't bring her to the store. We bring the store to her. The logic was uncomfortable because it was correct. Orla Vance was more valuable at the water treatment plant than she was inside our building. Her expertise was location-specific. Bringing her to safety meant losing the thing that made her essential. I understood in that moment something about the nature of what we were building. The store was not the center. The store was one node in a system that had to extend outward, to the mill, to the church, to the water plant, to homes with people we hadn't yet reached. The town wasn't going to survive by contracting into a single fortified point. It was going to survive by reconnecting. We reached Orla on day 11, and the operation that brought her diesel fuel also broke something inside the group that I should have seen fracturing. The fuel run required siphoning diesel from every vehicle we could access within a safe radius. Parked trucks, the school's maintenance equipment, an agricultural tank on the property adjacent to Marguerite's farm. Cal and Thomas, Marguerite's grandson, had become the primary outside team. They were young, fast, and had developed an instinct for the ghost suits that bordered on artistry. They could cross open ground in full daylight during a low-activity window, with a calm that made the older adults simultaneously proud and sick with worry. They collected 47 gallons across 2 days. Ray organized a transport chain, volunteers in ghost suits moving 5-gallon containers in relays from the store to the water plant along a route that Bram had mapped through backyards and alleyways. The operation involved 11 people, took 14 hours across 2 nights, and succeeded without a single drifter contact. Orla met each delivery team at the plant's service entrance, recorded the fuel quantity in a logbook, and sent them back with handwritten notes detailing the water system status in technical language that Bram translated for the rest of us. On the second night, when the last fuel container was delivered, Cal and Tomas didn't come back with the returning relay team. They arrived 40 minutes late, coming through the loading dock with a third person between them. A woman in her 70s, disoriented and dehydrated, whom they'd found locked in a bathroom in an abandoned house 3 blocks from the plant. She'd been there for 11 days. Her name was Helen. She had dementia that fluctuated between lucidity and confusion, and she had survived because the bathroom had a working faucet and because she had been too frightened to make any sound. Denny treated her. Mrs. Pratt settled her among the children, who adopted her with a gentleness that dissolved every adult who witnessed it. Helen became, in the strange economy of the store, the person the children took care of. A reversal that gave them agency and gave her the constant supervision her condition required. But the 40-minute deviation from the planned route triggered the conflict I'd been sensing beneath the surface since our numbers had doubled. Patrice confronted Cal in the stockroom. I overheard it. The store's acoustics didn't permit privacy. You left the route. You were 40 minutes past expected return. 11 people were exposed because the relay chain couldn't confirm your position. We found a person. You found a risk. Every unplanned stop, every deviation, every improvised rescue is a variable that the people waiting for you have to absorb. You don't get to make that choice for them. So we leave a 70-year-old woman in a bathroom to die. You radio back. You report the situation. You let the group decide. There was no radio. There was a woman who needed help now. Patrice was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I will remember for the rest of my life. Heroism that you perform alone is indistinguishable from selfishness. Both of them put your judgment above everyone else's. Cal didn't respond. He walked out of the stockroom and climbed to the roof and sat beside the greenhouse frames and didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the night. He was 17. He had saved 22 lives in 10 days. The children, Helen, the people who depended on his ghost suit designs and his operational instincts. And Patrice was right, and Cal was right, and the space between those two truths was the space where every community lives and bleeds. I found Patrice at the counter afterward. She was reorganizing inventory sheets that didn't need reorganizing. You were hard on him, I said. Someone has to be. You won't. What does that mean? It means you're building a system, June, and every system needs someone who enforces the rules even when the rules feel wrong. You're too busy inventing to discipline, so I do it, and I'm aware of how that makes people feel about me. She didn't look up. She kept organizing her sheets, and I stood there knowing she was right and hating that the thing we were building required someone to be the person nobody wanted to thank. On day 18, the Sawmill boiler burned through its last diesel and went silent. We knew it was coming. Ray had estimated 4 to 5 days, and it had given us 6, which meant either his calculation was conservative or the boiler was more efficient at low output than its specifications suggested. Either way, at 3:22 p.m. on a Tuesday, the subsonic rumble that had become Coloulston's heartbeat, the vibration I could feel in the store's concrete floor, the signal that told us the drifters were being drawn north and away, simply stopped. The silence was physiological. My body registered the absence before my mind processed it. My chest felt hollow in the space where the vibration had been, as though a hand had been pressed against my sternum for 6 days and was suddenly removed. Within hours, the pattern on the streets began to change. Bram, on roof watch, reported drifters drifting south again. Slowly, aimlessly, pulled by the residual heat signatures of a town whose systems were dying one by one. The Chevron's propane tanks, the school's heating system, the transformer behind the fire station, each a weakening candle in a darkening room. The drifters were returning to the distributed constellation of stimuli that the Sawmill had temporarily overpowered. "We need a replacement," Bram said. "We don't have one," I said. "We don't have another boiler, and we don't have enough diesel to fuel it if we did. Every gallon we have is committed to Orla's water plant." Then we changed the approach. This was Marguerite who spoke, standing at the stockroom door with hay on her boots and a smell of goat milk on her jacket. She had been spending her mornings at the church lot tending the herd, and her afternoons in the store contributing to operational planning with the direct, uncluttered thinking of someone who had managed a farm alone for 15 years. "You've been pulling them to one point," she said. "One big signal. When it dies, they scatter. That's a single point of failure. On a farm, you don't fence 100 acres with one post. You use hundreds of posts, each one small, each one positioned to guide the animals where you want them to go." Oren's fire breaks from the Sonoma cliff. Except this wasn't Sonoma, and Marguerite wasn't thinking about terrain. She was thinking about behavior. "Small, persistent, distributed stimulus sources," she continued. "Place them along the routes you want the drifters to follow. Each one doesn't need to be powerful. It just needs to be warmer or louder than the surrounding area by a small margin. Chain them together and you create a gradient pathway. A corridor. You don't draw them to a destination. You guide them along a route that leads away from where people are." Cal was already on his feet. "Car batteries," he said. "We have access to hundreds of them. Every vehicle in town has a 12-volt battery. Connect a battery to a resistive load, a heating coil, an incandescent bulb, a length of nichrome wire, and you get a small, sustained heat source that runs for days. Place them every 200 yards along a path leading north out of town. Each one is a stepping stone. The drifters follow the chain." "How many would we need?" I asked. "Depends on how far north we want to guide them. But I can build the heating units from stock in the store. Nichrome wire from aisle 7, terminal connectors, insulated housing from the junction box inventory. Give me a day and I'll have a prototype." He had a working prototype in 4 hours. A car battery wired to a coil of nichrome wire inside a ventilated metal junction box, producing a steady warmth roughly equivalent to a human body at rest. Silent, low profile, simple enough to be replicated by anyone with wire strippers and a basic understanding of positive and negative terminals. We built 31 of them in 2 days. Every able-bodied person in the store participated. Stripping wire, assembling housings, testing connections. The children sorted terminal connectors by size. Helen, in one of her lucid periods, wrapped wire joins with electrical tape with the meticulous care of someone performing needlework. The assembly line was the first time all 53 people worked on a single project simultaneously. And something in the room shifted that I can only describe as alignment. Deployment took 3 nights. Teams of 3 in ghost suits, carrying batteries and heating units strapped to pack frames Cal had welded from steel conduit, placed the devices at intervals along the northern road out of Coloulston. The route passed the Sawmill, over the river bridge, and into the national forest land that stretched uninhabited for 30 miles. The first night, Cal and Thomas placed units 1 through 12. The second night, Ray and 2 volunteers extended the chain to 24. The third night, Marguerite and a team of 3 reached the forest boundary and placed the final 7, creating a gradient pathway that stretched 2.5 miles from the town center to the edge of wilderness. I monitored from the roof each night. Through binoculars, I couldn't see the heating units. They were too small, too dim, but I could see their effect. Drifters on the northern streets would pause, reorient, and begin moving toward the nearest stepping stone. When they reached it, they'd linger. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, and then continue to the next, pulled by the marginally stronger signal up the chain. It was slow, it was imperfect. Some drifters wandered off the path and circulated back, but the net flow was northward, outward, away. By day 23, Bram's rooftop counts showed a 70% reduction in visible drifters within the town center. The streets weren't clear. They would never be clear. But the density had dropped below the threshold where routine movement between buildings required ghost suits and relay chains. People could cross the street, not casually, not carelessly, but with reasonable confidence during daylight hours if they moved quietly and checked sightlines. The town began to reconnect, not metaphorically, physically. Orla walked to the store from the water plant for the first time, carrying a thermos of treated water as though it were a diplomatic gift. She was gaunt and exhausted, and she sat in the break room and drank coffee and spoke to no one for an hour. And nobody disturbed her because everyone understood what solitary operation of critical infrastructure for 3 weeks had cost. Bram organized a census, Using the message drop system that had proved itself, volunteers contacted every occupied household in Coloulston. The count came back. 214 people confirmed alive and sheltering, out of 2,200. The number was a wound we absorbed in silence. Bram read it aloud once, wrote it on the whiteboard below Nia's, below the growing schedule and water projections, and did not read it again. But 214 people was also a resource. The message drops went out again, this time as a survey. Skills, supplies, needs, capacity. The responses painted a picture of a town that was damaged but not empty. A retired electrician on Maple Street, a nurse sheltering with her family on Oak, a man with a diesel truck and 400 gallons of heating oil, a woman with a ham radio and the knowledge to operate it. The ham radio changed everything. Her name was Della Boykin, 74, a lifelong amateur radio operator who had been transmitting blind since day one without knowing if anyone was listening. We got her a fresh battery bank. She got us the outside world, scattered, fragmented, but real. Other towns, other survivors, other supply stores and churches and schools where people had done exactly what we had done, looked at what they had and decided it was enough to start with. Coloulston did not become safe. I want to be precise about that. The drifters were managed, not eliminated. The battery chain required maintenance. Units failed, batteries drained, placement needed adjustment as conditions changed. The water plant demanded constant vigilance. The greenhouse produced its first harvest on day 41. Undersized tomatoes and leggy lettuce that tasted like a promise kept. But caloric self-sufficiency was months away. What Coloulston became was operational, a town that ran. Not as it had before, not with the invisible infrastructure of a functioning civilization, but with the visible, deliberate, maintained by hand infrastructure of people who understood every system because they had built every system and who kept those systems running because the alternative was to stop. I swept the store floor on day 45, not because it needed sweeping, because my father had swept it every night at closing, and some rituals are worth keeping even when the reason they started is gone. The bell sits on a shelf behind the counter. I removed the clapper on day one and I never reinstalled it. The store doesn't announce arrivals anymore. People come and go through the loading dock, through the side gate, through the roof access hatch that leads to the greenhouse. The door the bell once guarded is bolted shut and hasn't opened in months. But I kept the bell because my father installed it and because what it represented. The ordinary rhythm of a store serving a town, a customer walking in, a need met with a product handed across a counter, is still exactly what this building does. The products are different, the needs are deeper. The counter has been replaced by a distribution board where Patrice tracks allocations with dry erase markers in her precise, unforgiving handwriting. I am a shopkeeper. The outbreak didn't transform me into something unrecognizable. It clarified what I already was. A person who stands inside a building full of useful things and figures out who needs what. The scale changed, the stakes changed, the inventory changed. But the work is the same work, and the bell, silent on its shelf, still counts everyone who enters, 11,253 at last count.